Rome season 1 episode 12 Kalends of February is over, but here on post show recaps we're just getting started. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with DM Philly. Philly, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. I want to chant a number again, Grace. Do I say
Mhm.
12, 12, 12? I know that was yesterday's episode, but I'm still
Yeah.
hung up on the 13.
Big episode, season finale of season 1 of Rome, Rich.
Oh, yeah. The Kalends of February. You like that little bit of tricky wordplay that they utilized to obfuscate what was going to happen here? This was a big episode,
Mhm.
Grace, the finale of season one.
Yeah, the Kalends of February. It's the Ides of March, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. But
Yeah.
they played a little chicanery with us. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I kind of figured that this was where we were going. I thought a good episode. This is the moment. I think probably the most famous Caesar moment. So I thought that overall, it worked out well. My big prediction that Niobe's baby still on the board, ultimately comes true as that comes to a head. Although with a twist that I did not see coming.
Nope.
Um, so yeah, I'm excited to talk through the episode. Make sure folks are subscribed. Post recaps.com/Rome, as we will be not stopping. We have season 2 episode 1 on schedule for tomorrow. Yeah, Rich, do you want me to give you the quick plot recap? I thought I would do this like really quick. My
Yeah.
plot recap is they killed Caesar.
At two, Grace.
He didn't
They
even
did.
say
They
it.
killed
He didn't
Caesar.
even say it. He
That's
didn't
the
say it.
recap. No, they didn't. I really like what they do here in terms of like playing with all the preconceptions and all the kind of lore around it and all the other mythology. Like ultimately they're not redoing Shakespeare, right? So like I
Yeah.
kind of appreciate that they don't say it. I love that they named the episode The Kalends of February. Like it's all so right there, but they don't do it the same way. And I got to give them credit for that. I'm really excited to get your takes on all this. I've been like waiting to talk about this episode with you for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ultimately, I thought was really interesting is going into the show. I didn't know anything about Lucius Varenus and Titus Pulo, and the way that it part of me was thinking as we get Caesar being stabbed by the senators on the floor by Brutus, we're cutting that with Varenus learning about the fact that his grandson is not his son. In fact, it's his wife's baby that he had with another man while he was away at war. And the way that that is fully interspliced into Caesar, I thought was really interesting because that's not what I would have expected from this show at the beginning. That intercut into, again, the most famous moment perhaps in the history of Rome,
Mhm.
gets interspliced with this very intimate story of a man who is mentioned in Caesar's diaries, records, but there's such a big focus on it. I mean, seemingly because they'll be around him, and also I think the last moment of this episode is Pulo and Irene walking. It is Irene, right? It's not Venus. I was like trying to make sure I had this right, but it is
No, yeah, it's a Rene, yes. Yeah.
them walking off together into the sunset. That's the end of the season. In a way that, as we were starting to watch it, I was like, oh, Caesar's in this, but he's not super in it, right? So I just thought it was that was my big takeaway, is that the death of Caesar is interspliced with the tales of these two soldiers that we've been following along.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about it to you since the beginning, but I think part of what's so fun about Rome and why it's such a successful show, even so far out from its inception, is the way that we're dropping into like these everyday people's lives juxtaposed against the big politics, right? This is kind of like an element of the Game of Thrones of it all, where you have this like incredible ensemble of characters, and they're not all involved in like the high court intrigue, right? You have like your power players and your nobles and the political movers and shakers, but you get in with these two rank and file soldiers and we get super invested in their lives. And the way that, we talk about a lot of TV, Grace, but yes, the convergence of these plot lines, the way that everything comes together, the way that we've like tracked the information kind of moving from Pulo and Octavia to like Octavian to Servilia, like into this moment to be able to capitalize on it in the 11th hour, I think is really well done. And it's kind of bold in that they like don't shove it down our throats of like how everybody knows everything. We just do it the once in each episode, we move on. And it's a great way to like handle a through line in a season of TV, I think. But yeah, it's a big surprise, right? That like Caesar is to a degree like amongst the least important people this episode, right? He's very much more like a MacGuffin. Like it's like the plot happening to him, you know?
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, let's talk through it in terms of I don't know who we want to start with. Maybe we'll leave sort of the Caesar stuff for last. But we see Varenis, who is with Niobe. They have this new piece of land that they've gotten. He talks about how they might be exiled to it if Caesar is going to make it so that that he's upset about him saving Pula. We're seeing this mural on the wall, right? We're seeing a play at the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
recreation of the fight. And so these two men have become a bit of folklore, although Verena seemingly more so. I feel like he gets, he's the one who kills the final man in the graffiti, in the mural on the wall. Pulo's like on the ground while Varenis is like, in the fighting in the depiction. So just very interesting. And Varenis is the one who, Caesar will bring him to go see him, and he's gonna say like, yeah, I mean, I should probably punish you, but I can't. You're too popular, and so actually, I'm gonna make you a senator. And it's so interesting that this seems to be the thing. I mean, it's this, and also Gauls and Celts are
Mm-hmm.
also going to be made senators. Caesar trying to expand the Senate, sort of his power. I would love maybe for a bit, like I can clearly understand in the show that it's designed just to be sort of a thing that sort of a straw that breaks the camel's back in
Mm-hmm.
terms of a thing that really sets Cicero and Cassius and Brutus off in terms of like how dare he invite these who call Varenis a pleb holding a seat in the Senate. It'd be interesting to hear from some Roman historians about the machinations of this, why Caesar does it exactly. Calls about them like some of the oldest tribes around who will perhaps appreciate the fact that they've been given power in the Senate. But this is sort of the thing, the Varenis in becoming a member of Senate, seemingly the thing that upsets them the most.
Yeah, he agitates them, right? I mean, again, my lens of interpreting a lot of this is all going to Crusader Kings 3, Grace, and like
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of civilization. This notion of like you have these vassals in the Gauls and the Celts that he wants to bring in. He's running the Octavian plan, right? Of like you need to create a bunch of new senators that are your creatures that are not like in the pockets of other people. And this is Caesar's maneuver. It's like, okay, we've conquered these people. They've served us. They operate as these like vassal states of the Republic out in the distance. Let's like bring them into Rome. Let's drown them in like gold and wine and like put them in togas here in the Senate so that they can like be my tools, you know? Um, I really I get where you're coming from, you know. I guess like to the discussion we kind of had yesterday of like how much of the politics belongs in the show, you know. I think they do a good job articulating like it's enough of an agitation to set off the establishment, and the status quo want nothing to do with this, right? The idea of like bringing in these low men as it were into like the Senate chambers is really off-putting, you know. But the whole reaction of like Varenis, first of all, I do love Varenis and Niobe going to the farm and having to like fertilize the land, so to speak, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
Pulo's whole like break from the hospital at the beginning, it's like delightful. Like the popularity of these two guys by the people is great. You get that play and you hear them, or it may even be like the guy who wakes Pulo up is explaining to him, like, no, you and Lucius Varenis are like super famous now.
Yeah.
You're a symbol of brotherly love, right? They're very much like Philadelphia, Grace. And
There's
like,
a very funny line that was very well written. He says, "I'm taking your likeness," and he's like, "What are you taking from me?" Because he's the previous episode he gets robbed while he's sleeping, right? So they're
yes,
taking something from him. And he's like, "I'm taking your likeness." He's like, "What do you mean?" It's very good. It's very funny. Yeah.
it's fantastic. I know there's a lot of like old mythology around "Don't draw my picture, you'll steal my soul" type
Right.
of stuff, right?
Hmm.
It's really fascinating. The notion that like I think it's because of the class distinction between these two guys. Again, it's like a real bit of subtext across season one. But Lucius Varenis is a man like Varenis is an important name. He's not like a nobleman. He's not like that important in Rome, but he also is like not. He like has this kind of history in this family lineage where Pulo is like the son of a slave, right? And has like nothing and is no one. And so the distinction between the two of them, like Varanus has already been upjumped by Caesar, right? Not just the prefect and the evocati. Even when Varanus wakes Pulo up and Pulo's like, Lucius Varanus, sir, is the first thing he says to him. Like, despite this bromance that we've fallen in love with, there is like a class distinction between these two guys, even, right? And the like camaraderie between them being something that the Roman people sees onto as like an ability to like bridge the gap between the kind of like social castes is really an interesting little footnote to all of this. But I feel you. They could have delved deeper into the politics. You would kind of expect it with a show called Rome. My question for you, Grace, is like, did you expect this is where we were going for the finale of season 1?
Yes.
Like, yes. Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I've been alluding to it, that this is like season
Yeah.
1 is the rise and fall of Caesar. This is partially just like I can't help myself but to be Googling like Roman history, and then you
Sure.
kind of get the idea that like, yeah, and Caesar a bit. So this is on HBO, but in Canada, our HBO is often packaged. If you want the digital streaming service, it's through Crave. So you get
I
Crave.
want to make a Grace joke, but do they call your HBO HBO in Canada? Is that a thing?
HBO, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's through Crave is the streaming service we have, and it's funny because and this is a thing that actually, to talk about Dark for a second, a lot of people send in a lot of feedback, Rich. I got a lot of feedback that people hate that the image for Dark on Netflix is an end game image that people feel like is too spoilery.
Yes.
Which I will say, there is this like, speaking of crossing the Rubicon, I was talking to my parents when I was home about how I was watching Yellowstone. And I also said this about like 2 months ago. I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to start watching Yellowstone. And at that point, my dad could have been like, so-and-so, I can't believe they killed their character off, blah, blah. And that goes over my head. I don't know who that is. I don't know if they're important. Like, I wouldn't remember a single thing. Now that I'm watching the show, I was like, my dad started being like, oh, it's really great. I was like, no. You're going to accidentally spoil me, right? Like, now I know these things. The Crave image is Mark Antony and 2 people I don't believe we've met. And so I feel like that signaled to me that like, yeah, I don't think Caesar, like perhaps Kieran Hines is not fully in the, like, okay, Mark Antony is the person that they're like highlighting in this image. So I feel like we're going, I figured
that's
heading into season 2
promotional material that they're using for that thumbnail.
That is not very clearly does not have Caesar in it, and it has Mark Antony, some other people I don't know who I'm assuming we will meet. So I did figure this is the trajectory of the show, that season 1 is about Caesar becoming dictator and then ultimately him dying. I mean, if this was modern day, I mean, I covered The Crown here on post show recaps as well. It's coming back. They're like fully extending how much they can get Princess Diana in their television show. They're like, she probably should have died last season, and they're like, no, we could no subscribers.
Let's keep it alive. It's funny, on the heels of the conversation we had yesterday about the kind of state of television when this thing came out. It's an 18-year-old show. This exists at a time where there's no such thing as like, yes, let's like green light 5 seasons of this $1 billion Rings of Power production. Like, this does not exist. These folks are like making the show on like a wish and a prayer. They get greenlit by HBO, and like, you got to leave it all out there. I think that this is something that gets lost when we talk about like the golden age of television and like the state of like entertainment decline where we're at now, that like the intention in creating television shows now, it's really different than it was 15 years ago. But there's an expectation that you're not just creating a television show, Grace. You're creating like intellectual property that needs to have like return on investment. That ROI is like the end
by
game.
the Rome box set.
Yeah, right. Like, there's no chance if like HBO greenlights a series like this, they're gonna like let it go in 2 seasons if the numbers are like anything less than abysmal, because you build like your marquee on this thing. You want to like keep it going. You need to keep the characters alive. So I found something so refreshing about like, no, this is a season of television that like leaves it all on the field, right? Like, they're going for it. They're gonna swing for the fences. They're gonna tell a big story.
All on the field.
Yeah, they sure did, much to the pleasure of that Latin speaking priest. Yeah. It's a different animal, but it really struck me going back to it. Like, oh yeah, they wouldn't do this now.
Yeah, I mean, I toyed with the idea too of how much to like allude to this. I feel like I did enough without being like basic. I think last episode I was like, yeah, I think Caesar's gonna die soon. But I do feel like the story is pretty well written. And then this idea last episode you're talking about how the BBC version like condensed these first 3 episodes as opposed to the American version. But I feel like you have to know I mean, it's the most famous thing about Julius Caesar, I think, is that
It
he's a
kind of
dad.
is.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like you can also feel it. I've talked a lot about the depiction of a dictator in the show and how I think it might be different it was made today. But nevertheless, this is a season of television that is like Caesar might be he so early on. It's like, okay, yeah, this is how he gets one over. And unfortunately, I feel like sometimes that's at the expense of like Pompey Magnus. And I joked about his bad edit. Like he seems like such a fool, and Caesar keeps getting one up on him. And then later, as we're going, though, it feels like as he's back in Rome, that he is making choices that feel strategically like they make sense. I mean, he does it. He becomes emperor for life. And also at the same time, I think the show does a really good job of showing us the way that he might have hubris. He literally says, it's only hubris if I get killed. Is it
Yeah.
right? Something like that.
Mark Antony calls him out. It's only hubris if I fail.
If I
Yeah. Yeah.
fail. And then also at the same time, all this like the swelling of discontent below the surface. I feel like the show, I don't know, there's this study, Rich, that was done, and I talked a lot about this. I can't remember which show. It doesn't matter. Maybe it was The Last of Us, but about there have been studies that have shown where people will watch the same movie, but the information they get from the people running the study, in one, they'll basically spoil the movie. They're like, this is the movie about somebody who has a loss
Mhm.
in their life, whatever, and they spoil it. And the other one, they're like, okay, enjoy the movie. And then they rate their enjoyment of the movie, and people actually seem to enjoy the movie more when they are spoiled. And I know that, like, yes, this is all anecdotal. Some people hate being spoiled and whatever, but I feel like you're rewatching it, but I'm watching it for the first time, but I do kind of know the story. And I felt like there was a way in which that actually enhanced my viewing of season 1 of Rome, knowing that this is a historical event that I presumed we were leading up to in season 1. And
Mhm.
then I feel like the way they counteract that, right? Like I feel like we do know in this episode, like Julius Caesar is going to die. He's going to get stabbed when he goes
Mhm.
to Senate. And also at the same time, they pair that with the story that we don't know. And there's this
Yep.
incredibly huge twist. I feel like that Niobe kills herself when it's revealed. She said, don't blame don't blame the boy. And then she kills herself. That's tragic. And it's something you couldn't have seen.
Nope.
I mean, you could have guessed it maybe, but I really didn't. The way that they are like so in love over the course of the season, I really didn't see it coming. So that was a really interesting choice for Rome I thought, again, just to talk about like, did I see this coming? Like, yes. I also think that that's okay. And I kind of got both worlds. I kind of watched a show
Yep.
that I was spoiled on and that I wasn't spoiled on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, but I think part of what I love about, especially this first season of Rome, is the exploration of contradiction, right? It's a thing we talked about yesterday in terms of Caesar. Like Caesar is trying to steal power. He is a tyrant. He keeps like, despite what he says, this is what he's doing. He wants absolute authority, but in his effort to like seize authority, he's enacting a bunch of like progressive ideals. He's empowering the proletariats. He's like doing things that we approve of, which creates this really fascinating like irony there. And in the same way with like the exploration of Varanus and Niobe's relationship, right? Like we're kind of on the side of Varanus, and then like we see the dynamic as he comes home, and that feels bad, but he clearly does love this woman and wants to be a better husband than he is, and he does, and we watch them fall in love, and we love that. And they do so much good stuff here of like the Hitchcock like ticking bomb under the table. Like you've been tracking it all season. We know this information's out there. There is like this sort of Damocles hanging over Varanus's head that we know is going to fall. And then we see it fall, but we like have so many questions about how it's going to play out. And they're able to like invert it on us where it is like tragic and heartbreaking for Varanus. Like he storms
The
into that
scene,
house and
no,
it's
the
a
scene where
lot of
he's
like,
in the hall, Rich, it like when he's he's walking down the streets and the tears in his eyes,
yeah,
like Yeah, gosh, that's some good stuff right there.
It's
That's
devastating,
yeah,
right? Like, we were hyping him up yesterday, the actor, but he
yeah,
comes home and you feel so much for him, and then he rages into the house, and you're like,
yeah,
"Oh, Lucius Forenus, like, don't lose me here. Don't do
yeah,
something that,
yeah,
like, I'm never gonna be able to forgive you for. We
yeah,
love Niobe. Like, you
yeah.
guys were so happy. Get over it, dude." Right? And then
Mhm,
she, in the end, like, makes this choice that destroys him even more, and it's so horrifically tragic for both of them, right? Like, you can feel terrible that he put her in this position, that like she lives in a world where this kind of shame, that she thinks that this is the correct course of action, that he's willing to like put so much shame on her to drive her to jump, right? But then
mhm,
you also have to feel terrible for him that he like is so like broken by the end of this, because there's part of you that like is convinced that maybe he could have forgiven her. Like, maybe if they like, if she does not make that choice in the moment, there's like a path back to repair this damage, right? And it's just crushing in that way. And so I love it. And then to the notion of the spoilers of it all, just like to dive into it for a second, of like, as the guy who talks about a lot of adaptations over here at post show recaps,
yeah.
this is a really satisfying experience of the like Leo pointing gif watching
Mhm,
the episode, like knowing what's going to happen. It's part of like the joy that like, and can be very frustrating, of like watching something with somebody who's seen it a million times and they're explaining to you like, oh, did you notice that she just said this, and that's going to be important because like they want you to have that same feeling of satisfaction, right? Of being able to
uh-huh,
like, oh, the puzzle pieces fit in place. It's like one
uh-huh,
of these like weird, I don't know, TikTok probably, or like YouTube channels of like things that like are satisfyingly fun to watch fit into one another, right? Of like a
mhm,
cat laying perfectly in a sink. There's just something about like when the things line up and you watch it all come together that is satisfying. It's part of like the way the human brain works. I'm sure that Dr. Woodward would have something to say about that, you know? So I do think like you point out what is a really strong writing trajectory across the season here, that they're able to like be insightful enough to weave in this story of incredible tension and uncertainty in the Lucius Varenus Niobe arc, amidst this absolutely foregone conclusion of like, and then Brutus is going to stab Caesar, right? And
yes.
I joked about it to begin with, but like the subversion of expectations of like the Kalends of February, that like you're waiting for him to say at 2, but he just doesn't do it. He just
It
dies,
just
right?
dies.
Yeah.
Yes, before we get to the stabbing scene, I do the other thing I think that is really fun is the way in which they're gonna play with real historical events and how you depict it, and then you've put in these people who, like has been pointed out, Lucius Varenus is a real person. He is mentioned by Julius Caesar, but like his entire life is fictionalized. And so I really also loved, so basically, Frennis finds out about this because Servilia. So no, who tells? How does he
Yeah,
find
so
out?
so Caesar like is like, okay, we're gonna get rid of all my guards, and Pasca's giving him hell, and he's like, no, no, it doesn't matter because I have Varenus at my
Frennis,
side, right?
right?
And then like Cicero and all those guys go back to Servilia's house and are bitching, and they mention, oh, he's got Lucius Varenus at his side. She's like, why do I know that name? Wait, what?
Oh
And
yeah,
then like,
because
oh,
Octavia had
remember?
told her,
Yeah,
or yeah, because Octavian had told Octavia, who seemingly tells Servilia. So when they go and whisper in his ear, like, "Hey," and the way that he then like he's like, "Well, f this, I'm gonna leave," and the way that
yeah,
when they're walking in, like, "Hey, where's Varenus?" Like, "Oh, he's just with us, but I'm sure he just stepped aside," and then that scene happens. It's really that's to me, I really like that. This is very like do you watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? This is a Quentin
oh
Tarantino
yeah,
movie
for sure,
where that's
yes.
that's like it's that one is like real events that get completely fictionalized, but I feel like it's the same way as in which like they play with, you know, real events and then how fictional people like end up. I'm sure there's a better example that people can think of, but I just did really enjoy the like, you know, so he's got like he's so confident. He's like, well, who's going to touch me if I have Varanus by my side? He's so popular, and you know, and they're talking about like he can't be killed, so they figure out how to get him out of the equation. But it's also fun from the idea of like, well, we don't think that Lucius Varenus was in the Senate. Like he could have been there and it wouldn't have met, like they could have written it that way, but it's kind of fun to be like, yeah, there's no record of Lucius Varenus being in Senate when this
Right.
thing
So
happened, so
like,
like
how does this work?
let's
Yep.
write him that he like heads home, and then that also you can then also tie that into like the explanation that like Caesar has no defense, like everybody in the Senate is attacking him. It's pretty fun.
It's great. I mean, I just think it's such like a brilliant convergence, right? Because they just like they get him in one foul swoop here, right? Like the whole situation with Niobe and his children, this is just collateral damage. This was not the intention to like F up Lucius Varenus's family. The intention is to like get him rattled enough and on his heels and distracted enough. They don't know that he's not going to like walk into the Senate with Caesar. They're just trying to like get in his head so that they're able to like seize the moment. Like very likely they expect that they're going to have to kill Lucius Varenus also, and that like they'll just the only way that they could get like a leg up on this guy, a prefect of the Evocati, I don't know if you heard, Grace, is to like rattle his cage this way. But by him leaving, he leaves Caesar vulnerable. And so it's this great also like hanging weight of like the double whammy here. Lucius Varenus literally just lost everything, right? Like with Niobe jumping, the whole like scenarios that plays out at the end, he like lost Caesar. He's presumably like not going to get that Senate seat, Grace. You know, like there's definitely like incredible fallout for this man right here. And given everything that we know about him, like it's not something he's going to take lightly. Right. Like his absence at Caesar's side is going to have like implications that reverberate out of here. So I'm interested to like talk about that later this week as we keep going forward. But again, I just think it's like such well arced like trajectory for these characters and to like converge your plot all back in on itself here at the end, you know?
Right. Let's talk about the Caesar scene. We have a few other things we'll get to, but we're kind of here anyway, which is yeah, I thought again, such a famous moment. I thought it was really it's well done. I think this idea of like, and then Brutus being so hesitant to pick up a knife until Cassius tells him he has to go do it. He kind of delivers like the final blow. I thought that the depiction of Caesar on the ground, again, I really do. One of my big pet peeves is the person dying out who delivers their final words. And it's like, so I was waiting for Et tu, Brute, but and whether they would translate it, because these are all British actors. I was waiting for it not to be in Latin, but it never comes. And I like that choice a lot. And then I think it's like him lying on the ground, his hand is twitching. I don't know if this is an intentional choice, but basically I'm wondering if like the fact that he had epilepsy, it really hasn't come up since the episode where he has a seizure, but whether or not like, and I've never thought about this, it's pretty horrific to think about, but whether if somebody was would that like elicit a series that like his body reacted, just the way he's like twitching. And then also he like pulls the like seemingly my read of this, I don't know, it's such an interesting choice, and whether Kieran Hines did it or this is a director choice or the writer, but him trying to basically cover his face or what he's trying to do. That's my read. So the director here is Alan Taylor. The writer is Bruno Heller, who wrote almost every episode of season one, a bunch of them, about half. Yeah, I feel like it's covering his face, but I'm interested in your read of that.
I think it's the same thing, right? There's a point earlier, like when after Varenus lets Pompey go, and he comes back to Caesar and he's talking to him, and he's like, he's a broken man. There was water coming from his eyes, is like one of the things he says, right? And this notion of like honor and shame, it's also important, I very much think he's trying to cover his face. I think he's trying to like cover the weakness. He's trying to like hide the mortality in the moment. He's trying to like hide the grimaces of fear, right? He is this like larger than life figure, and he knows that he's dying, and that he's dying with like no dignity as he lays on the floor, potentially like having a seizure, but going through all the other things that like a body does as it dies, right? Which is a lot of like involuntary, undignified responses in like, especially in response to the violence. I thought the death scene is also excellent. This is a thing that like you get in so many films, because film has to be dramatic, right? And like when you watch in war movies or anything like this, and these guys are getting shot, and they're breathing in the agony and the pleas, let me give you my last wishes, like do this, do that here, take the picture, whatever it is, but the reality is like, you talk to like veterans, you talk to people who've seen violent deaths, and they're like, nope, like a lot, somebody gets hit with a bullet, they go down like a sack of potatoes, right? That's it, they're done. Like there's none of this that goes on. So they extend it. And what I love, I guess, is the other element, the way that we've built up how in real time in Rome, these events that are just rumors of like Caesar and Servilia become like mythologized in the time like through the graffiti on the walls, through like the retelling and the exaggeration and like the explosion of stories. I mean, it's just like media today, except it's not like clickbait articles. It's just like crude graffiti on the walls, right? But
Right.
like the sensationalism of these little tidbits of truths. And so the way that like the guy holds up to these many stabbings, the way that Brutus is like the last one to go to him. I really love when they first come for him. Caesar, the soldier, he like got here through warfare, right? He's like ostensibly a little bit more equipped for like violence than a lot of these senators who have spent their lives on these like marble benches, like voting yes or no, right? The greatest like battles they've ever been in is trying to like hear what that old man said from up on the pulpit.
Right.
But Caesar like grabs the knife of the first guy who comes at him, right? And his hands are slipped apart, and they have to stab him like many, many times, right? And like the haunting weight of like, you know, the whole thing of like et tu Brute is that Brutus is his friend. And we've watched this kind of frenemies relationship between the two of them. Like Titus Pullo and Lucius Varenus, these two are not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like from the beginning, we see like Caesar using Brutus as a cat's paw. He's going to kind of excommunicate him. Brutus ends up with Pompey. He's like switches sides back, whatever. But the idea, like the whole conversation we talked about yesterday, I saw you as a father. And Brutus being like, yeah, I do see you as my father. And still you're doing this to me. Still, like that final moment of like him like wanting to speak, not getting words out. Like that's some haunting stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Grace. That's going to weigh on this guy. And I think it emotionally resonates on the mythology that I know of like Et tu Brute. I think that they do a really great job. Like mad props to Kieran Hines and Tobias Menzies here for like nailing the scene as well as they do. But I just thought it all really is done excellently as we close it out.
Totally agree. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's talk about one thing. You're talking about the mythology. One thing I love about the Pulo stuff of this episode is he starts in the hospital and he gets woken up and he learns that this mural is happening. He's gonna steal the horse and ride and pass out near Varenus's house, and he's eventually gonna be taken in, and him and Varenus will sort of laugh as Pulo realizes like we're famous. I also love this with the idea. I actually in one way it felt not sad, but it's like, yeah, they are famous and also they are barely actually known to history. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
the account of their
Yes.
life is actually pretty much completely fictionalized in this TV show. And so this idea that it made me think about how fame is not that. There are very few people to the history of the world who get remembered in history,
Yeah.
right?
The Julius Caesars are few and far between.
Right.
Like we sit here and struggle with like, who is that?
Yeah.
Cato,
Yeah.
Scipio,
Yeah.
Cicero, Pompey. Like,
And the joke of like how often you think about the Roman Empire, like, you know, Julius Caesar might be getting thought about but is like Pompey Magnus? I don't think so. So the idea that like Varenus and Pulo, they get a play, you know, the play is made at in their name, like is a reenactment of the fight. That there's this mural on the wall that gets painted of the two of them. And again, I love the idea that Pulo is not the most formidable in the especially in the mural. He's like lying on the ground as he is just
I
like
know.
right, and he's still
Nobody
like
cares. What have you done for me lately, Grace? He killed those
yeah.
15 guys. It only matters who killed the last one,
That's
right?
right, but he's so proud, right? That he's like, you know, and he's like, this is, this is, we'll be able to get women and we're famous. And I just like thought about it from, the modern sense of fame in terms of, 2000 years later, like we don't really know who these guys are, only that Rome has chosen to depict, like, taken their names and chosen to depict them in a
What I
television
hear you
show.
saying is they're internet famous.
They're internet famous. They're
Like, I do think it's
influencers.
so
Yeah.
fascinating because, again, like I've been really indexing on this through line of like how much of this endures, like to the meme of it all. We think about Rome every day, like so much of this culture, of the methodology, of the practices of the Roman Empire have been distilled down like through Europe to North America. They're part of like all of these major worldwide, like Western cultures, certainly espouse these values to like some high degree. And the way that it's like the same game as ever, right? So many people, like myself included, as I sit here, like talking to you through your digital device in your pocket, you want to leave your mark, right? You want to say something that like somebody remembers. You want to make an impact. Like, I'm not going to have kids, Grace. Like, I make this proclamation boldly, but
Mhm.
like my line will not carry on through my ancestors or through my forebears or whatever. I'm using both those words wrong, I know.
That's
But
fine.
nonetheless, like there's some part of me that like feels better that should I walk out my door tomorrow and get run over by a bus, like some bit of me shall endure in the digital ghost space that is the internet. You know, years from now, somebody may be coming back listening to our Rome podcast if the grid is like still up and
No,
active.
I
But
think in
also, like,
2,000 years, there'll be a record that like Grace and Philly did this. There'll be no record, historical record of the podcast. So it'll just be like then people recreating like what they thought our podcast sounded like.
in
Mhm.
the story of like the turning of Josh Wigler at
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
Mahadeo, is
Yeah.
that what it's going to be at the
Yeah.
end? At two
Mhm.
Kevin?
Yeah. Mhm. They were like they mostly, I think, just talked about Dungeons and Dragons, I think. That's
The
weird.
Dungeons and Dragons was a huge cultural
Yeah.
moment at the turn of
Yeah.
the millennia. I
Yeah.
just think it's so interesting because, like, 2000 years, same problems. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, fame
Yeah.
is fleeting, it's
Yeah.
temporary. You could be at the top of the pile today, and then, like, you're totally forgotten tomorrow.
Yeah.
Walk around your house right now, anybody, I defy you. Look at any one of the, like, incredibly sophisticated pieces of technology that you have access to, and then say, who invented that?
Huh.
You know, like, fame is cheap and
That light
disposable.
bulb was Edison. I don't even think it was Edison. I think actually he
I don't
stole
think
that.
it is
Yeah,
either.
it's
Yeah, he
not
stole it
Edison.
from Nikola Tesla,
Yeah.
didn't he?
My telephone is from Alexander Graham Bell. Also, I believe he stole that from somebody else, but that's fine.
That's a
Um,
good one. What about the microphone? It's an Italian guy. I used to remember his name, but, yeah.
microphone.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
microphone, eh? Yeah.
microphone. I am torn on the Pulo ending. I like that Pulo gets an happy ending. I'm not sure that Irene should have gone with him. This is a man who killed her lover. So I feel
Yeah,
a little like I'm like, yeah, but he's like going, he's like, I'm gonna beg for forgiveness. I have the name of who he's gonna go beg to, but alas,
the
doesn't matter.
goddess, yeah. He wants
Yeah,
to go to one of the temples. I like that as, like, a vehicle for him to be like, because what he's saying to her is like, "Do you think she can forgive me of all the terrible things I've done in my life? Do you
yeah.
think that the gods will forgive me?" And Irene, like, who knows what the gods will do, you know? I think that,
Mhm,
like, look, in the context of, like, a slave owner, Pulo is, like, really shown a lot of, like, kind generosity to this woman, and
mhm.
despite, like, again, like, I'm making all these excuses, you have to couch it this way, despite the fact that he, like, killed her, heart husband there,
Yeah.
um, he had, like, good intentions. She is free. She's a free woman now. She doesn't
Mhm.
need to be in Lucius Forensis' house. Like, she could go pursue a life somewhere else, right? She's here because, like, this has become her family in a way. Niobe's, like, giving her a place to live, a place to work, like, an opportunity to, like, find her footing, you know? So I do think that like, you know, it's a little, like, colored certainly by, like, what's occurred. But I do think, like, Pulo's interaction with the Rene is, like, not just like unambiguously bad or good. It's
Yeah,
really complex.
I would agree. I feel like for me, I do feel like it is. I like that Fulo gets like this like happy. He's the last thing we see in the episode. I feel like for me this is a critique of the writing of Arene. Of
Sure.
like
Yes.
that's I can feel the like it's not that long ago. It also is 18 years ago, as you said. Yeah, he's going to pray to the goddess of Racina, who's the goddess of the fields. So yeah, from
Oh, Lucius and Niobe prayed to that same goddess earlier in the
I
episode. Yeah.
know ringing the bell like please stop pretending to sleep together on the field. Um, yeah, so they're gonna head out. They head out holding hands after they do find. He prays to the sacred Racina. Um, we get a little bit. The Servilia inviting Atia over to basically be like, hey, just so you know, like Caesar's dying right now is
Oh
pretty
my
awesome.
god.
Yeah.
I know that, I've been, like, pretty high on Atty all season, and we both pretty unambiguously agree that, like, Atty is horrible, like, probably the most unambiguously, like, evil person on the show. She's
Yep.
just pretty malicious all the time. She's selfish, she's narcissistic, she's very self-indulgent, and a horrible mother, but
Yep.
she's very fun to watch on TV. But Servilia, like, giving her this moment of, like, "Oh, I just invited you over for lemon water," and also to, like, have the satisfaction of, like, watching you while I salt your wounds.
Yeah.
Like, run to Greece, run and hide, run to your new miserable life. I will chase you. It's so menacing, Grace. It's so menacing.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting is just if we're like sitting in here as, this is about the Rome, and we've talked about that. People said like, oh, like Caesar wasn't the emperor of Rome. It actually, like, it's not really, because it doesn't really become an empire until actually after Caesar's death. And this is where I believe we're going in season 2. And so I know who Octavian becomes. And so seeing Servilia, who I'm actually will segue into our Colosseum or our arena battle, because I think I'll give it to Servilia. I'm trying not to be result oriented in terms of knowing what comes next, which is basically Caesar sets up a power dynamic that will allow for Rome to become an empire, right? So this
Yep.
idea that they're going to kill Caesar to save the Republic is wrong. And yet I still will give Servilia who I'm going to enter in, because I feel like she doesn't have to do any of the kills. Like Brutus is the one who goes and does it, and he does it. But I feel like, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to give him I'm not going to enter him in. I feel
No.
like Servilia organizing this whole thing to get her, done, and to basically get like a seasons long culmination of revenge on Attia and Caesar. We talked about that scene. You highlighted it earlier in the season, right? Where she curses both of their houses. Certainly feels not good for them. So I'm going to enter Servilia into the arena, into the Colosseum. What about you?
Grace,
Yeah.
I think that we've come to a head here. It's
Uh-huh.
episode 12. It's the end of season 1.
Uh-huh.
I have nobody that I want to enter into the Colosseum other than
Whoa.
Servilia. So I
Okay.
think that I just have to also put Servilia in there, and she could just like win
Okay.
unambiguously. I know it's very results oriented, but again, like, part of what I talked about early on in the episode 1 coverage, like a huge part of like telling the show, this is not Game of Thrones, right? Like,
Mhm.
you don't get to have a Daenerys Targaryen here with like her dragons that gets to be like an empowering woman who wants to operate outside the system to a
Mhm.
degree. Like, these women are trapped by the system that they're in. They are women who are trapped by history, by like a history that has repeated itself for thousands of years on end, and like still perpetuates these kind of like indoctrinating systems that like are often really disenfranchising for half the species, right? And ultimately, like, you talk about poor writing for Rene and the kind of closure here of the
Yeah.
episode. Like I think that like we can take the very simple Bechtel test and be like, that's a big fail right there, right? Where for Servilia, like, I think it's probably also a fail, but also she goes through incredible suffering emotionally, physically, socially across the entire season. But she
Mhm.
gets her comeuppance here in the end. And it really is like her machinations. It's her dysfunctional parenting that's going to leverage Brutus into the moment. It's her like willingness to use her house to host these conspirators for like half the season now, right? That
Mhm.
she's got like Pompey's kid sleeping on the couch in the back room, just like, we're going to get you off the bottle and ready to go do a revenge plot, and ultimately, like, by the story we're being told on the HBO series Rome in season 1, she wins. She
Yeah.
wins the day. Her plan comes to fruition. All the pieces fall into place. It is her maneuver. It is her information gathering that allows like her woman to go whisper in Lucius Varanus's ear in the 11th hour and leave Caesar unexposed. And it's pretty impressive, it really is. I think like she deserves it. Go Lindsay Duncan.
Okay. That leaves us in an interesting place. Here's the records for folks as we end season 1 of Rome. Caesar, every time he got put into the arena, he won. He's 3-0. And he is dead now.
I
So
should have put him in today
I
just for
know,
the loss.
just for the
My bad.
loss.
Sorry, I'm a bad podcaster, guys.
That's okay. Pulo went 3-1, so he won more times. He only lost once. He lost to
13, 3-1, you said.
Yeah, that's
13,
right.
13.
That's right. Varanus went 3-2, so it looks like he got put in the most, which means he like often was, which I think tracks on the season.
I
So
like that. 3-2. He got a promotion above Pulo. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
Servilia goes 2-1. Octavian wins the only time he gets put in. Attia goes 0-2. Mark Antony goes 0-2.
That's
Pompey,
about right.
Cleopatra, and Irene all go 0-1. So yeah,
I
they get
feel
in, but
bad.
they lose. Yeah.
I feel bad for Cleopatra. Attia and Mark Antony going 0-2 is good. We didn't talk about Mark Antony at all. I love the Mark Antony bit. I may be like jumping ahead, but like, can I
Do it.
favorite scene? I think
Do
favorite
it.
scene is like, I wanted to say Pulo stealing the horse, but I'm remembering Mark
Uh-huh.
Antony mean mugging Brutus at the end there. Like him looking at all of them with Caesar's body on the floor is like
It's pretty good.
absolutely fantastic. It's a great way to like have him walk off enough stage left, like leaving this ominous threat of Mark Antony coming in season 2.
It's pretty good. I'm gonna highlight again. I like to go a little bit sillier. I think the like, I'm taking your likeness. Like, what are you taking from me? It's so funny. That's too good for me not to vote for that one. All right, that's the end of season 1, Rich.
That is the end of season 1. Mad love to the newsreader, who I thought had like an
Yeah.
excellent little performance this
I
episode.
really noticed his hands this time.
Yes.
I really did start to notice them.
He's getting wild with his hands. He does these crazy hand maneuvers like he's
Yeah.
directing ships on an aircraft carrier, you know? It's like
good.
wild, man. I love it.
All right, we'll be back tomorrow with season 2, episode 1. We're just going to keep going because there's 22 weekdays in October and there are 22 episodes of Rome, so we have to keep going. Passover is the season 2 premiere episode. Rich, where can people find you?
Across the Rubicon. I'm at DM Philly out there on the internet and all the places you might want to look for me. My DMs are open on Twitter.
You can find me at Hi from Grace. All right, we'll be back tomorrow as we talk about Rome every single day.